The sun was setting over Cebu City, painting the sky orange and red, but the narrow alley where Marco, 14, and Luis, 11, stood remained dark and crowded. Rusted tin roofs leaned toward each other like tired shoulders. The smell of frying fish mixed with seawater and dust. This was home. Marco held a broken guitar with only 5 strings. Luis stood beside him, barefoot, his shorts torn at the knees. They were thin, their faces marked by hunger, but when Marco strummed, something changed. The alley disappeared. Their voices rose together, soft at first, then stronger, singing an old Filipino song their mother had taught them. It was a song about hope, about waiting for tomorrow. Neighbors paused. A tired vendor wiped her eyes. A tricycle driver stopped his engine to listen. Across the alley, their mother, Anna, knelt beside a bucket of soapy water, scrubbing clothes that were not hers. Her hands were raw and shaking, but when she heard her son sing, she stopped. Tears slid down her face and fell into the water. That night, they earned only a few coins. Not enough for dinner. Marco counted them slowly, then looked at his brother. Someday, he said quietly, forcing a smile, people will pay to hear us sing. Luis hugged the guitar as if it were treasure. Will we ever leave Cebu? Marco looked up at the sky, where one star had just appeared between electric wires. Yes, he whispered. Even if we are poor, our voices are not. The camera pulls back, their song echoing through the alley, small voices dreaming of a world far beyond Cebu City. The wind cut through the streets of Dublin like a blade. Grey clouds hung low, and rain tapped endlessly against the pavement. Marco, now 17, pulled his thin jacket tighter around himself. Luis, smaller and quieter, rubbed his hands together to keep warm. This was nothing like Cebu. They stood near a busy bridge, their guitar case open on the wet ground. A small sign written in shaky letters read, "We sing to survive." Marco began to play. His fingers were stiff from the cold, but the melody found its way out. Luis joined in, his voice trembling at first, then steady. Their song floated through the noise of traffic and footsteps, gentle, painful, honest. Most people passed by without looking. Some slowed down, then moved on. A few coins dropped into the case, echoing loudly in the emptiness. The boys exchanged quick glances, trying to stay hopeful. They lived in a cramped shelter room shared with other migrant workers, sending every spare cent back home to Cebu. At night, they slept on thin mattresses, dreaming of warm streets and their mother's smile. As they sang, a man with a worn scarf and a violin case stopped. He listened carefully, his eyes fixed on them. When the song ended, he applauded softly. "You don't sing like beggars," he said gently. "You sing like survivors." He asked their story. Marco spoke of Cebu, of poverty, of crossing oceans with nothing but their voices. The man nodded, then pulled out his phone. "There's a stage in this city," he said. "A big one. And I think it's waiting for you." Rain continued to fall, but for the first time since arriving in Ireland, the cold felt a little less cruel. Bright white lights flooded the stage, blinding Marco and Luis as they walked forward. The crowd was a dark blur beyond the edge of the spotlight. Their hearts pounded louder than the audience's murmurs. This stage felt larger than any dream they had ever dared to have. Marco adjusted the guitar strap on his worn shoulder. Luis gripped the microphone with both hands, his fingers shaking. The judges watched closely. One leaned forward with curiosity. Another smiled politely. Simon sat back, arms crossed, unreadable. "Tell us about yourselves," a judge asked. Marco swallowed hard. "We are from Cebu City, Philippines. We are poor. We moved to Ireland to survive." His voice cracked. "Singing is all we have." A soft murmur rippled through the crowd. Simon nodded slightly. All right. Let's hear it. The music began, slow, simple, fragile. Luis sang the first line, his voice thin but honest. Marco joined in, harmony building like a quiet prayer. The song told a story of hunger, distance, and hope across oceans. One judge reached toward the buzzer, unsure. The red button glowed ominously. The crowd grew restless. Then, halfway through the song, Marco closed his eyes and poured everything into the melody. Luis followed, his voice rising higher, stronger, breaking with emotion. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. The judge's hand froze midair. Simon leaned forward now, his expression changing. The room fell silent except for the boys' voices, filling every corner with pain and beauty. As the final note echoed, there was a pause, one terrifying second where no one moved. Then the crowd erupted. Applause thundered through the theater. Marco's hands trembled. Luis wiped tears from his cheeks. The buzzer was never pressed. Instead, something far bigger was about to happen. Miguel's final note hung in the air, trembling like it didn't want to let go. His lips quivered as the music faded, and he lowered the microphone slowly, afraid that the moment would disappear if he moved too quickly. For a heartbeat, then another, the entire Irish theater was completely silent. No clapping. No cheers. Just the sound of people quietly crying. Miguel stood frozen at center stage, his chest rising and falling fast. His eyes searched the judge's table, unsure if he had done enough. His hands were shaking, and his knees felt weak. He thought of his mother lying in their small home in Tondo, waiting for medicine, waiting for hope. Tears finally spilled from his eyes, sliding down his cheeks under the bright stage lights. At the judge's table, emotions overflowed. One judge covered her face, shoulders shaking as she cried openly. Another judge stared at Miguel with red, watery eyes, nodding slowly in disbelief. Simon Cowell remained standing, his hands pressed against the table, breathing deeply as he tried to regain control. His eyes were wet, his expression completely changed. The audience began to rise, one by one, until the entire theater was on its feet. Applause slowly filled the room, growing louder and louder, mixed with sobs and cheers. Some people shouted Miguel's name through tears. Simon finally spoke, his voice cracked and unsteady. "I need a moment," he said softly, wiping his face. "Because what we just heard, that wasn't a performance." He paused, struggling to continue. "That was pain. That was love." Miguel bowed his head, crying freely now. On a stage thousands of miles from home, a poor Filipino boy had done something extraordinary. He had made the judges, the audience, and even the toughest critic in the room feel deeply human again. Golden confetti still drifted through the air as Marco and Luis stood at the center of the stage, trembling. The noise of the crowd faded into a distant echo. For the first time in their lives, the boys felt seen. A large screen behind them lit up. A shaky video call connected. Their mother, Anna, appeared from a small room in Cebu City. The walls were bare. Her eyes were red from crying. "My sons," she whispered, covering her mouth. Marco's strength broke. Tears streamed down his face. "Ma. We sang for you." The judges stepped forward. One wrapped a coat around Luis's shoulders. Another held Marco's hands, saying softly, "You changed this room tonight." Simon approached last. His voice was quiet now. "This button doesn't change who you are," he said. "It just gives the world a chance to hear you." The crowd began chanting their names. Flags waved, the Philippine flag glowing on the screen, mixed with cheers from Ireland. Two worlds, one song. Backstage later, the boys sat alone, still shaking. Marco opened their old guitar case. Inside were the same few coins they once counted on the streets of Dublin. Luis smiled through tears. We don't need these anymore. Marco shook his head gently. No. We keep them. So we remember. The camera pulls back as they walk down the hallway together, hand in hand, still poor in money, but rich in hope. Their voices rise once more, no longer lost in alleys or rain, but carried toward a future they finally believe in. Fade out.